Welcome to Leaders of Life Sciences, the podcast where we spotlight the people shaping the future of pharma and biotech. Each episode, we speak with founders, senior execs, scientists, and strategists about how they lead, what drives them, and the real impact they're making on teams, organizations, and the lives of patients. If you want fresh insight into what great leadership looks like in life sciences, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hi, Kristin. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, really well, really well. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to the listeners. Kristin is a powerhouse in global leadership and talent development. Kristin Berkinsky is the CHRO at Adair Pharma Solutions. She's got over 20 years of experience leading HR strategy across life sciences, at pharma, manufacturing, business services sectors. She's steered organizational transformation at companies like Conduent, Argo, TurboServe, Halo Pharma, and is renowned for building high-performing teams and driving change on a global scale. So she's got a background in philosophy from Penn State. Is that right, Kristin?
That's right.
Great. So this is which I might add is a great foundation to have a conversation about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
She brings a unique, thoughtful perspective to leadership, culture, the future of work. Kristin, welcome to the show. And my very first question is, what makes you most proud when we run through your background in that introduction?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I enjoy leaving strong teams in my wake. And those are strong HR teams. Those are strong executive leadership teams. Those are strong senior leadership teams and down through the organization. I am most proud when I know that I have built a foundation that outlasts me.
Awesome. So it's building something that's there to stay regardless of or not.
Yep. And there are multiple phases in an organization's life cycle, and very few people, myself included, are good at every single one of these phases. I'm really good at sort of startup, transformation, turnarounds, fix it. And I adore building the team that is going to be fantastic at the next phase and knowing when to let go and knowing when it's time to pass this beautiful thing that I've built onto someone who's going to love it and take care of it just as much as I will.
I mean, I can hear, well, first of all, I've got context because we've had some really interesting and fun conversations in the lead up, but even in the way you talk about it, sounds like you care and are excited about that. So what is it about that in particular that lights you up?
So human resources is a function that it touches people on both the organizational, global, institutional level, but also on the individual level. It's the individual atoms that make up the whole body, right? And being able to navigate both the strategic and the individual detail is a real skill. I know that when I've changed an organization for the better, I've also changed not just the individual employees' lives for the better. And I could point to, well, this person's, in a better place and that person's in a better place, but their families, their communities. I have I've thought about what's my why. My why is proving to boards and investors and managers and employees that doing the right thing is profitable. And doing the right thing is doing the right thing for your employees. Now, that doesn't mean you give everything to everybody with the way they want it, when they want it. That's a recipe for both, bankruptcy at a company level and spoiled brats as a parent. Giving employees what they need is not the same thing as giving everybody what they want, but it is a way in the world I can touch to make that part of the world a better place in some way.
Right. So I really like that point on giving people what they need isn't always giving them what they want. I used to have conversations with a coach of mine, and we talk about the difference between being kind and being nice.
Right.
There's a difference. Being nice is sort of nodding and going along with everything. Being kind, sometimes the kindest thing to do is have the difficult conversation with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think here, this is a nice place to ask this question, because we start to, even in this early part, we start to broach on the conversation around like philosophy, for example, because there's a very philosophical take on leadership. So for you, with your background in philosophy, how do you think that has helped you with your, like, I guess, shape your view, shape your approach on leadership and leadership development?
So, very broadly, I cannot recommend an a foundational education in philosophy or history or language arts, political science enough. For me, in general, philosophy honed my critical thinking skills, my communication skills. You take, a huge volume of somewhat dense text and create a condensed summary that's accessible. Or you take a very condensed, accessible piece of text and pull it apart into a 20-page essay. It is a question I get in every single interview I've ever been in. Philosophy, my succinct answer is it teaches you how to think. And whether you go into sales or finance or manufacturing or public service, I passionately believe knowing how to think is a good thing. Specifically in leadership and organizational development, Socrates started with what makes a good leader. Plato spent his career trying to build good leaders. Machiavelli, there's the essential question of philosophy is what is a good life and what makes a good king? And, it is found how we are going to behave and interact towards each other. The purpose of philosophy wasn't always to be theoretical. It was to be very practical in what is the way to approach how we're going to be with each other in society. And I don't know, I like that.
Yeah, nice. I think in our conversations before, felt like we could talk on this for a
Yeah.
very long time. Really interesting take, and probably different from what people would typically hear from your leadership handbook, kind of advice and guidance and just the theory. So for you, someone that's really passionate about leadership and with that kind of view on it, for you, let's ask you the philosophical question. You asked what makes a good king, for example, at the center of philosophical debate. What makes a good leader?
I believe that to some extent leadership is situational, and to be a leader, a true cut above the average is to be able to flex and meet the moment. And to do that requires this really hard needle to thread of having the ego to think you can do it, as well as the ability to suppress the ego and realize that you're going to have to do it potentially differently and out of your comfort zone, or differently for the situation or for the person that you're trying to help lead. I believe that a big part of leadership is creating a sort of an organizational fit. Leaders drive the culture. HR enables the culture. CEOs create the culture. And if you have the ability to say, this is the culture I want to build, and this is the culture I want to reward, this is the culture I want to hire for, this is the culture I want to, frankly, let people go over, you create like-minded, philosophically aligned people that like to work in the way that you are most effective. So a lot of it is gathering and building your team and understanding that nobody is going to be a carbon copy of you, and you have to flex to the moment. But at the same time, not be spineless. Have your principles, have your set of, this is what I believe in, this is our mission, this is our vision. I think that a great leader has a really good sense of what it is they're accomplishing and can rally the troops to that in the what and the how at the same time. So you're not burning the village to save it. You're not putting up with toxic behavior for quarterly results. And you are picking the place where you're going to thrive, and you're creating the team that is going to thrive with you. And like I said, different situations will call for different emphasis at different times. So some of it is figuring out, as a leader, you have more ability to build that. Younger in your career or at different places in your career, you have to figure out how to pick it. Yeah, and what I mean by that is be really choosy about whether you're going to succeed in a particular environment or not. And if the answer is no, it doesn't mean it's a bad environment. Objectively, it means it's a bad environment for you.
I really like that distinction. So it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it might not be right. The amount of conversations I've had historically with, it's not you and it's not the other person, it's the people together. And people will talk
Right.
about that in a relationship, but they often forget that in terms of the culture that they're entering into in a work capacity
Mm-hmm.
or as a leader or your leader-employee relationship. And it just as much as we talk about in a relationship, that is still, if you're an employee, if you're a leader, you're still in a relationship with the business or the people around you. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of relationship, right? So one thing I want to pick up on there that you talked about, and I think this would be interesting for people that have heard this term, probably only in a negative negative connotations before, is when you talk about the ego and the ego being able to be
Mm-hmm.
strong enough to engage, but managed enough to know when to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
For those listening, explain what you mean by ego in that context, as opposed to probably the way people typically heard it of
Yeah.
you've got such an ego.
Right. To be a leader, you have to start with, or a necessary component of being a leader is the idea that you have something of value to contribute to the situation and that you are well poised to do it and that the organization or situation will be better off for you having offered that up. That is, in some ways, the very definition of an ego. Like, I have enough presence and confidence to say, I, I not only can I do this, but I should do this. This people will be better off if I do this. And I've certainly dealt with very bright people who, if you want to use another word for ego, it is self-confidence. But you have to have a baseline of self-confidence or develop a baseline of self-confidence that you're pretty sure that your contribution is necessary at this particular time. And to do that, think about it. You have to have some ego to do that. Otherwise, you're a great idea in a closed room.
So the ego is not just a destructive thing as people often talk about it, but it can be very constructive by having the belief in oneself to actually step forward and take the responsibility to do
Mm-hmm.
something, or even feel compelled that you have to take responsibility
Right.
to do that.
Yep.
Nice. So how would one, let's say somebody's out there listening to this at the moment, and let's do this two ways. We'll do the first way is they feel like they've got that thing to contribute, but maybe don't have the strength of belief in
Mm-hmm.
themselves yet. Like what are the practical ways that people can actually develop that to take on more responsibility as a leader going forward?
So I'm sure you know that you're extremely familiar with the concept of imposter syndrome, and and we've talked a little bit about like I played the what if game or the so what game. And some of this is muscle memory. Some of this is allowing yourself to take the chance and then going through the worst case scenario. You put yourself out there. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, they can say no. Okay, then what? Well, then I'll look like a fool. Okay, then what? Well, then and usually people stall there. Like, okay, you looked like a fool. Did you lose your house? Did you get fired? And sometimes the answer is, wow, this is a really risky idea. And I think it's going to work, but it's risky. Okay, what's the consequence? Well, it'll fail. And then what? Well, then I'll get fired. Ooh, that sounds bad. Then what? Well, then I'll have to look for a job. Are you going to burn your reputation in your field? Like you could never get another job? Well, no. Do you have severance? Do you have unemployment? Do you have savings? Yeah. How long does it take you to find a job? 3 to 6 months. Okay. So you tried something. It failed. It failed so bad that they decided to blame you for it. And then you go get a new job. It's not that big a deal, guys. So when you play that what if scenario and play it out, think about the absolute worst thing that can happen to you and play it all the way down to like I'll miss a mortgage payment. I'll lose my house. Will you be homeless? Are you going to die of starvation on the streets? Because you know what? If the answer to that is yes, then that's too big of a risk. I got you. That I'll back you on that one. But if the answer is I'm momentarily uncomfortable and maybe even so uncomfortable that this particular job doesn't work out, okay, like you're going to learn so much by doing this, and you'll build the muscle memory to raise your hand. You'll build the muscle memory to sit at the table. People say, how do I get to sit at the table? You show up and you sit down. And you go through that process mentally, and then you practice it. You practice it. You do it a couple times, and it starts to become easier after a while. Or some people go like, oh boy, I did it. I even succeeded, but I hated it so much that I don't want to do it again. I'm like, okay, well then maybe this isn't for you. That's okay too.
And at least at that point, you've got a frame of reference rather than thinking I might not like it, because equally, the number of people that do it and have a bad experience is massively outweighed by the number of people that do it and have a good experience and then go, do you know what? I want more of that. That
Exactly. That was kind of fun. I liked that. I liked that rush. I liked being able to do it the way I really felt was probably going to work. I like being able to make my job easier, my life easier, my company easier, my team's life better. And it's validating. It's kind of fun. Try it.
Yeah, I really like that tool. I'm from a coaching background myself, and would use the then what, and the way I learned it really firsthand because I was running my own business, and was a genuine then what of like, okay, this could end up with you not being able to afford to pay for roof over my head. Worst case scenario was I moved back in with parents. It's a little bit, might feel a bit humiliating for a bit, but then it will be all right. It'll all be fine. So I'd really encourage people listening to this, if there is something you're looking at that you're a bit nervous about doing, is genuinely sit down and work through it. And personally, I find working through it on paper a really valuable way to do it. So sorry, the light's just gone off in here. Work through it on paper and write down, like literally write until you can't until you can't think of anything else to write, and then write then what, and follow it until you've literally got nothing else left to write. I think it's a really, really valuable tool. So if you got anything to add on that, Kristin?
I'll just say that the real life experience versus the theoretical. When my husband was starting his business, we went through that, and we might have to move in with my father, which has all kinds of problems associated with it on both sides of that equation. On the other hand, we'll be okay.
Nice. So you actually used it practically in your life.
Yeah, in the practical application, that's the best. We talked about this before. The best part, in my opinion, the most effective way to learn something is to try it, is the real life experience. And we can talk about the what if scenario, but apply it to something that you're struggling with. Do it. And then, I'm a big fan of making decisions based on real life facts instead of emotional fears. Emotional fears tell you something. You should pay attention to those. I absolutely am a fan of noticing when you've got a strong instinct for something, but then dive into, try to figure out, why do you have that instinct? Where is it coming from? What is it really telling you? And is it fact-based? Then go from there.
Who is it that talks to? Is it the truth? Can I 100% say that it's the truth? If this wasn't true, how would I behave instead? So what should I do? Because the 4-step, I can't remember for the life of me.
Yeah.
There's a framework to work through. And again, a really valuable way to work through it and process any of those kind of fear. I was going to say irrational fears, but they're not irrational, because there is something that sits behind them. But it's those fears that you could do something differently. It's just you're often sort of paralyzed by thinking, so you don't do the next thing differently.
Yeah.
So for you, and I think when we spoke before, I termed this as white knuckling it. So the first time you do it, you just have to do it, and then you've got your frame of reference to do something differently. So you're passionate about the difference between the theoretical versus practical leadership. So do you mind unpacking that a little bit further for us, like the difference between theory and real life leadership?
Right. They both are valuable and have their place. And the theory or classroom learning or seminar learning is really helpful to give you an idea of what the tool set is going to be to help you confront real life. But you get out there, the rubber hits the road, and that's the moment where you can apply theory to an actual tangible outcome. And the most valuable learning experiences that I've had, that I've observed, and that I've helped build for rising executives are high consequence of failure, real business or real life impact, and a risk. So to really embrace the idea of growing your talent, you have to be willing as an organization, as an executive leadership team, to accept failure. And that is so hard to do. And you have to play as an organization the same what if game as we do as an individual. And you have to sit down with the department leader, the CEO, to say, okay, what happens if we screw this up? And what people do is you really get insight into how they're going to perform under pressure, how they're going to learn, if they're going to learn, and if they're going to grow, not just in this situation, but in the future. And you build that as a leader, that muscle memory from success or failure or all the gradients in between, however you measure that, and you build your ability to do it better next time. And that's my goal is, I want people to grow and to continue to develop and to retire and feel like I'm still growing,
Earlier, you said that the job of HR is to enable the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, if you're trying to help, let's take that a step further and say you're enabling leaders to thrive, enabling the organization to take a risk in leaders, and this whole conversation around the risk of failure. What kind of support do you feel that you have to put in place? Or not do you feel you have to put, from your experience, do you put in place in order to make this kind of high risk leadership development a productive experience and to enable that growth that you see as so important?
It is a large extent a very customized experience. So, take a theoretical leader and we're putting her in charge of turnaround of a low performing facility. And let's just go for my industry. This facility makes life-saving drugs. So the risk of a failure is really high consequence. It's not just financial. It is, do we run into a drug shortage and this life-saving drug comes off the market? Do we create a situation where we have a less than quality product and we have, so it is a high wire act. So go through the areas where we might fail and where those consequences are really, frankly, unacceptable. Okay, got a new leader. We're throwing her into a new situation. Is she enabled to make the decisions about her team that she needs to make? A low-performing facility may have a low-performing team. Is she enabled to make the changes that she needs to make in the process? Is she going to get support from us? Does she have the infrastructure around her, from human resources, finance, the board, all the way down to have the check-ins? We're not throwing her into the deep end of the pool without a life jacket. It's like, no, are we all invested in the successful outcome here? And if you are willing to understand what risks you're not willing to take, if you have the infrastructure in place to mitigate the risks you're not willing to take, and you're willing to be as invested in the outcome as a leadership team as everybody else, but at the same time, balance that with not being overbearing, letting this person make some calls about her team that you'd go like, ugh, I'm not sure I'd have promoted that guy, but okay. And then not waiting till it's a disaster and swooping in to say, I told you so, but early check-ins. Hey, how's he doing? Are you happy with this? What success standards are you setting for your team? And little failures are fantastic because they allow you to address them before they become big failures. And keeping, the right level of contact along the way and the right definition of what continued progress and success looks like, you're going to turn that site around.
I can feel myself. Like I'm sitting here and imagining if I was in the shoes of one of these senior executives, for example, and you're allowing people to sort of forge that path. And I guess it's like you're watching on from afar, but you're still watching carefully, but you're not coming over and interfering. And that feels to me like, if we go again back to that point around ego, I can almost feel myself going, what if they make a mistake? Even just imagining myself in those shoes. So that sounds to me that's the point at which you need to be able to check yourself. And even if your urge is to go and get involved, you have to be able to pull yourself back and go, no, this isn't my time. This isn't for me to get involved. How do you know when the right time is to intervene?
We talked about philosophy. Big fan of the Socratic method in this moment. Ask the questions. So not getting involved does not mean hands off. Every successful transformation that I've done or managed, we start with a decision matrix. Whose decision is this? Is this going to be the new plant leader's decision? Is this HR's decision? Is this the CFO or the CEO's decision? Who is the final call? And it's not, a racy chart. Racy charts have their place. Sometimes they're it's like, sometimes you don't want to use an elephant gun to hunt a rabbit, right? But this is just, no, whose call is this? And once we decide whose call it is, that does not mean that the new plant manager, GM, has to navigate this alone. This means my job is to support her as she makes these decisions, to help her think through this, to be a sounding board, and to point things out that she may not have considered, to let her bounce ideas off of me. So like I said, this can be a very customized approach, but it's really freaking effective. And so you're not hands off. You're not sitting down the sidelines and seeing if they make it. You're involved, but you're clear from the get-go. This is your call. And when that person makes the call that you go like, okay, hopefully at that point, they've really talked through it. They've thought through it. They've demonstrated that, no, I'm aware of the risks. I've played the what if game. I've gone through the consequences. This is the right decision.
The image I have in my head for this is the barriers are up at the side of the lane. The ball's rolling. You're not taking the ball down there yourself. You're allowing it to roll down, but yours set up as the barriers either side and make sure they stay on target. And you're just there to stop them falling into the gutter either side, but you're allowing them to make the progress by themselves.
Correct. Yeah. And like I said, you defined at the beginning, unacceptable risk. It's unacceptable to us to put out unsafe product into the market. It's an industry standard. We're never going to do that. Okay. Is it an acceptable risk to have a dip in financials for 2 quarters? Maybe. Is it acceptable to us to have a dip in financials for 3? Maybe not. So like at what point do you call it, right? And you're clear about that. Nobody's surprised.
So let's say somebody does fail and fails hard, but you're happy with the risk tolerance, if you like, was there. How do you help people recover from, we played the then what before. Let's say someone does it and then they fail, then what do we?
Then what?
Then what?
Right. What? So philosophically, and this is a place where I like to get alignment with the CEO or whoever the leader is of that group, is we like lock eyes and say, this person's stepping up and taking a risk. They're doing well in their current role. That's why we're willing to take the risk. We believe this is going to work. Taking a risk doesn't mean you're being risky. It's just knowing that you're going into something without 100% assured success. But if it doesn't work, we're going to lock eyes and agree that this person does not get punished for taking this risk. That, there's a safe landing. There's a place for them. They were good at what they were doing. We're going to make sure that they don't leave this organization in disgrace, that we don't give up the good that they were already providing us, that made us feel good about this bet that we were laying down, that we don't lose that too. And you align philosophically on that, but I'll tell you, in the real world, it's hard. And what I counsel employees taking this risk is you'll succeed. You may not succeed here, but you will succeed. What I counsel leaders on taking that risk is this works out more often than it doesn't. And we're going to promise each other that we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater if this doesn't work. We're going to, so you go through another exercise where you say, what are all the reasons we're comfortable that this is a good idea? And what's the value they're providing today? That doesn't mean we don't backfill their role. It just means we will treat this person fairly and not punish them for stepping up. That's the organizational culture that you have to build to get people to be willing to take that risk. They have to see that it didn't 100% work out, but you were, my peer was okay when he or she did this.
And that needs to be true, not just for the sake of that person, but also for the sake of the future of the organization, right? If you want people to step into leadership positions in future and know that it's okay to take that risk, you can't be seen to be punishing the person that took the risk and failed, and they hadn't had that previous experience.
Correct. Yeah, you have to. And so you don't put people in a position where they're likely to fail. That's not fair. You don't hold back those opportunities for someone who's already checked every single box. Well, let me rephrase that. In an organization where I'm likely to find myself, which is growth or transition or change, that's not a recipe for change. Like if you're in a situation where there's a burning platform and you got to do something differently today than you did yesterday, the type of leader who's going to check every single box, been there, done that, is, less likely to be effective. So you're going to get people who check 80% of the boxes and you just go, 80%'s good. Let's go. Let's see if it works.
So that's the framework. The culture sounds like it's really an important part here of developing good leaders. It's going to foster good leaders, and it's also going to give them the opportunity to take the step into leadership, be picked up if they do fail. So what do you see? What are some of the ways that you see people get this wrong, or businesses get this wrong when they're trying to develop the people into leaders?
I see two things we do. One is we have an image in our mind of what this leader is going to look like. And we find it too difficult to deviate outside that pre-imagined vision. And this is where we sort of touch the third rail of DEI. I think that if we get so locked into a school, a resume, a face, an age, whatever it is, here's the 10 boxes, and these are the only 10 boxes, and this is the only experience I care about or want. This is the only background I care about or want. And by the way, I'm really not interested in pulling in any type of cultural waves, so I'm just going to hire what I already know works. Logically cutting yourself off from a large segment of the talent pool. And you're logically reducing the odds of finding the right person. The other thing that we do is we don't think ahead in time with enough thought on when we're going to pull the plug, when we're going to redirect, when we're going to call it. And so I see companies both do it too soon and do it too late. And doing it too late, you're really increasing the odds that you're going to lose that talent out of the organization altogether. Doing it too soon just sends the message that we didn't really mean it. And getting that balance right is not a timing thing, but I do think it's sort of results based, and it's really hard. I'm being very blithe here, but that's where I want to stress, you're not standing on the sidelines and watching it happen. You're involved and you're supportive and you're working the system. The image I have in my mind is you've got one person running the race, and you've got an entire team of coaches, but it's still that person on the track.
One of the frameworks I've heard talks the three steps, and the reason I mention this is you've talked a lot about the conversations you need to have even before somebody takes the risk or takes the position, or getting the alignment beforehand with the board, with other executives, with the culture, etc. So one of the frameworks is people need to know what is expected of them. So setting clear expectations at the outset. What success looks like, what failure looks like, where they're headed, all that kind of thing. The next is they need to know where they're up at against those expectations.
Yeah.
So on the ongoing, it's like, yeah, you're on time, or if you've got your person on the track, that image, you need to pick your pace up. You're substandard, or
Yeah.
whatever. And then the third one is people need to know what their future looks like.
Yeah.
So if people have clear expectations, you're constantly communicating where they're up against those expectations, and here's what happens in the future for you, given where you're against those expectations. Helps emotionally, it helps keep people on track, and also it means there are no surprises for anybody along the way, which is often the thing that is most detrimental, right? Is when we throw a curveball and all of a sudden it's like, well, where did that come from?
And I'll talk about sort of one of my other like life philosophies. When we created the General Motors performance management metric, where we're going to set annual goals and then we're going to quarterly check in, the world was an incredibly different place than it is right now. And when you're in a fast changing company, you have to leave a lot of room for those curveballs. And so setting up the expectation at the beginning, there's going to be curveballs. There's going to be changes in expectations. But that's just life. And you're going to have to roll with the punches on this one. But we all recognize that. And so when you get to the end of the process, you might say to your person, hey, we didn't meet all the financial objectives, but we also asked you to take on 2 extra plants in the middle of this. So when I introduced a concept to my team here, and I've used it in multiple places, when you're doing your annual review process, you have what I call the above and beyond section. All right, here's my goals. Here's what we did. Here's why we did it. Here's what we didn't do. Here's why. And then you have the extra credit section, and that's always bigger. Now, it won't always be bigger in every industry and in every company at every stage of its life, but where I find myself, it's always bigger. There's the curveballs that get thrown, and that's where, though, you have to have the constant alignment the whole time. You're making a good faith estimate in November, what you think is going to have been important when you're doing this review in March of the following calendar year. And you're not always going to be right about that, about what was important and what you needed to do. But if you are continually aligned during that process or during that stretch assignment about what's important right now, and it makes sense. People have to, you can't just be throwing curveballs at them and people go like, where the F did that come from? You really have to be throwing curveballs at them and they go like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I get that. Which means they have to have some insight into the mission of the company, the vision of the company, your practical goals, your financial situation, your board feedback. They have to know the landscape that they're working in. And 9 times out of 10, they're coming to you and saying, hey, I got to throw my own curveball here, because I know you said do this, but now that I'm in this situation, I think we really need to do this other thing. This is, and that's why you put them in that situation. If you knew exactly what to do and how to do it, it wouldn't be a stretch assignment. It wouldn't be hard. You just, do it.
If there was one belief about leadership that you wish more organizations would adopt, what would it be?
I'll go back to being more open-minded and more open-hearted about what a leader looks and sounds like. So we talked, I'll tell this story. Early in my HR career, I was assigned as the affirmative action expert. No background in affirmative action, but that's what I got assigned, probably because I was young and they're like, all right, make the new girl do it. And one of my business partners was our global head of manufacturing, and he had an organization of about 10,000 people. And the methodology we used we wanted to ensure that we had sort of the right representation in our workforce that sort of reflected the theoretical available talent pool. And if not, let's, create a plan to address that. And so I go into his organization, and I had done the analysis, and he was picture perfect. Like his existing employee organization, this is 10,000 people. So, it could bear the statistical anomaly, like it was statistically valid, matched the theoretically available talent pool in gender and race and age. And I'm like, okay, so clearly I'm not really going to tell you much. You tell me what's going on. And so this is the story he told. He said, Kristin, I'm, a Marine, 18 years old. I sign up. I do 3 tours in Vietnam. And I got to tell you, I came from a background that was flat out racist. I was born in Boston. My parents and I were down there boycotting the integration of the schools and the busing of students in. And that's how I grew up. And I'm embarrassed and ashamed, but that's how I grew up. And that's what I was, believed at 18. When I landed boots on the ground in Vietnam. And I learned really damn quick that the price of my prejudice was my life. That if I wanted to come back to my base camp that night, I needed the best driver, the best gunner, the best team. And I wasn't willing to bet my life on my prejudice. And then, he does 20 years of service, gets out, goes to Harvard, goes into operations, becomes our COO, and he's like, you know what I've learned now? You know what the price of our prejudice is? 1% of EBITDA, 1.5% of net earnings. Someone else wants to leave that competitive edge on the table? Fuck them, I'll pick it up. Get out of your own way when you think about what a leader looks like. Get out of your comfort zone. And this isn't, again, if you're going to restrict your talent pool to the people, a preconceived notion about what a leader looks like, logically, your next star might be in that talent pool, but the bigger the talent pool, the better able you are to see the whole landscape picture of what your available talent might be, both externally and internally, the more likely it is you're going to find that star.
Awesome. I think that's first of all, a really powerful story to finish up on, and a real strong piece of advice as well for anyone that's listening in and trying to build a high performing team. Kristin, if somebody's listening, let's say that they're not leading the team yet, but they're aspiring to be in that kind of position in the future, what would you say is what one piece of advice would you give to them?
Managers and leaders are not the same thing. Some of the most powerful, effective, influential leaders I've seen have been shop floor workers. And you just got to know that if Gary doesn't sign on to what you're doing, it ain't happening. So leaders and managers are not the same thing. But if you aspire to organizational, structural management, then understand that managers and leaders are not the same thing. That getting the title does not make you a leader. And so you can develop those skills at any place in the organization and at any type of organization, inside and out. From the people that pay you to show up to the places where you operate as a human in life, right? And personally, I'm a huge fan of the idea that leaders are there to enable other people's success. Your job is to help other people do their jobs. And if I find really successful leaders in whatever it looks like, whether you're, on the shop floor with no direct reports, but you're kind of like the senior guy on the floor, or you're the CEO, if you come to work every day thinking like, how do I help someone else be better at their job? You're going to develop a reputation as a leader. You're going to develop the skills as a leader. And the other thing you need to do is have a big enough ego to raise your hand when the opportunity comes up.
Kristin, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope the listeners enjoy it as well. if somebody's listening in and they're leading through a moment of chaos, or they're trying to take that risk, or maybe they're having a hard time allowing people to fail well in the team, where can they reach you if they just pick your brain and get some of your thoughts, or even just to ask for a bit of your advice or insight?
I am on LinkedIn. So, you can reach out to me with questions there. I'm not even sure how to answer this question. I'm the CHRO of Adair, and you can find me on LinkedIn and then find me at Adair. And, I find me through this podcast.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll link your LinkedIn profile in the podcast notes. But thanks so much. Thanks for sharing. I think it's really valuable insight, really valuable conversation for both people that are aspiring to develop themselves as leaders, and to be honest, even for real senior people in the market who perhaps need to shift their culture, their expectations of the leaders in the organisation as well. So thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to hearing the audience's thoughts.
Me too. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening to Leaders of Life Sciences. We hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to lead with clarity and purpose. If you're hiring, building your leadership team, or thinking about your next move, we'd love to support you. You'll find everything you need to get in touch in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the show, please follow and share it with someone who'd find it valuable. Until next time, keep leading forward.